Dr. Johan Lindahl, who is the General Secretary of the European Solar Manufacturing Council in Brussels. And even though I'm supposed to speak French, I made it in English because he will hold this presentation in English. And I'm really looking forward to know about what you think is going to happen about the activities of the ESMC and to see which role Europe will really play in the future. So, Johan, you're welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be invited here and to give an overview on the latest development. And I can bring some really exciting news, at least from our side. What has happened in the EU in the 2 past weeks, I would say, could be a game changer. But I would like to start with a little bit of setting the scene. We couldn't hear the whole speech from our friend from EIA, but what he was saying is that PV is becoming maybe the most important power source in the global in the near future, and we see accelerating installation volumes globally, but also, as I show here, in Europe. And Europe has set a goal through the EU Solar Strategy, a target of 750 gigawatt by 2030. And to reach that, you can see how much we need installed each year to reach that goal. So we foresee a large market growth in Europe, but also globally. And however, it is not really matched with our production capacity. So if you look in 2022, we only produced a small part of what we're installing. We're quite okay when it comes to polysilicon, but when it comes to wafer and cells, we are around 1 gigawatt. So we lack the production capacities in Europe as compared to how much we're going to install. And that, of course, means that we need to import. And we import a lot. This is the trade balance based on customs data for Europe as a whole region. And you can see that the trade balance is increasing as a negative trade balance is increasing. And most of that, as you all are aware, are coming from China. They are dominating the global manufacturing scene. And in some part of the value chain, for example, wafers and ingots, it's almost more than 95%. So they almost have a monopoly situation when it comes to certain parts of the value chain. So we had a trade balance of almost a little bit more than $11 billion last year, or in 2021. And it will probably increase also for 2022 then. And I also looked a little bit on the data for Switzerland. And as you can see, it's also the same situation. Switzerland's import a lot directly from China, and almost equally from the rest of Europe. But since the rest of Europe is also importing from China, I would say a majority of that import values also are associated to China. And the question is then, why is China so dominating? What's their sort of advantage? Is my mic? Okay, it's back. Thank you. This is a study that McKinsey did in collaboration with us at ESMC. And they had a look at production cost in different regions. And you can see there's a difference here between, for example, China and Europe of $7.3 was their sort of estimate at the current stage, but lower if we could reach scale in Europe. Don't take these numbers for exact. They are estimates, and some question this number from McKinsey. Others think they are in line, so there's a debate around them. But just the sort of general thing is that we have a higher electricity in Europe, especially now after the war in Ukraine and the energy crisis. This was estimated for pre-energy crisis in Europe. Higher labor cost, higher material cost, mainly due to that they in China have a much higher integrated value chain and a well-functioning value chain, while we currently lack that in Europe. So the total gap is, according to McKinsey, then $7.3 per watt. We can cut a little bit by that by not having to pay for the shipping cost in Europe. And we could cut half if we could rescale. If we could come up to 20, 30, even higher in gigawatt in annual production capacity, a lot of the difference could be changed. But there might still be a small difference there, around $3 per watt. And this could either, I think, be covered by EU premiums, subsidies, or putting a CO2 cost on the difference of the CO2 footprint of modules. This is a study from Fraunhofer that showed that the CO2 footprint for a module produced in China in all parts of the value chain has 30 to 40% higher CO2 footprint than in Europe. And if we should just put a price, and as an example here, the prices of the European ETS system, which was around 60 to 80 euros per tons last year, we would cover that difference, the last sort of step to be able to produce at the same cost. However, currently, it's not a question of manufacturing costs. Currently, we see a race between the superpowers, and it's really a subsidy race to get control of this industry. It is, as our friend from EIA showed and I expressed, it will be probably the biggest power source of the future in the world. And that is something that the superpowers are realized and trying to get control of. So if you look at the production cost in China, unsubsidized, and they have been subsidizing their industry for more than a decade through cheap free land, low loan rates, on utility side for lower electricity and water costs, but also relaxed labor laws. In the EU, we haven't done that. In EU, we have this sort of, or at least has been the holy grail of the internal market and the state aid rules that forbids member states to support their industries. So even if we add some shipping costs to the current production cost of Chinese modules, we are higher than what we import. And that's why we import so much. In other parts of the world, they have now taken serious steps to challenge this situation with the dominance of China. So Biden has introduced this Inflation Reduction Act, which, if all parts of the value chain are covered, almost cut the production costs in 3 by subsidies. And on top of that, there are some state-level investments incentives like Arizona's job credit scheme, and in addition to that, import tariffs for Chinese modules. So we will see US stepping into the game and really trying to secure domestic manufacturing capacities in the US in the near future through heavily subsidized industry policy, basically. The same goes for India. They don't have as high subsidies in place as in US, but on the other side, much higher import tariffs, so increasing the cost of importing goods from, for example, from China. So until now, China's been dominating. Now China is being challenged by the US and India, and Europe hasn't really joined the race until, I would say, 2-3 weeks ago. Because what's happened then is that the Commission launched the temporary crisis of transition framework and basically lifted the state aid rules to unlock investment in clean tech industries. And this is something very special. As I said, the sort of notion that member states are not allowed to subsidize their industries has been very sort of important for EU for a long time. But now, until the last of December 2025, member states are allowed to subsidize their clean tech industries. And they are allowed to do that without any notification to the EU if they don't exceed these levels that you can see in this table. So for large enterprises, there's a CAPEX support up to 15% for new industry projects. If you locate it in what's defined as a development area C, it's 5% higher, and then there is some certain regions that are classified with high needs, and you can get 15% higher. I will come to which regions or which in a minute. Medium enterprises get a little bit higher subsidies if they can convince the member state, and the same for small enterprises. And there are the possibility to give direct CAPEX support to clean tech projects, or tax advantages or loans or guarantees. And these are sort of the seed regions in Europe are those that are strong pink in this map. So basically Eastern Europe and Southern Italy, Spain and Portugal. So, and the definition is that it should be a region that has 75% of the GDP of the average of Europe. So in these regions you can have 5% higher. So what the EU Commission has done now is really allow the member states to act, and the major questions, there are the two major questions now. One is, of course, devil's in the details. What this actually will mean, how difficult it will be to acquire these funds, what are the prerequisites, etc. And that's something that we and many in the European PV manufacturing sector is now trying to understand. But it's also the question if will the member state take this opportunity to create new jobs and industries in Europe. And as I said, the devil is in the detail. There's one possibility also that if you can, for example, prove that your industry project would have received higher support in the US or somewhere else, there's something called a funding gap or matching aid. I won't go into it because this is, as I understand it, a complicated procedure, but it exists there. But also in addition to this lifting of the state aid rules, and I think this is a little bit of one of the beauty of the current situation, is that the European Commission has demanded that all member states are revising their recovery and resilience plans. So after the pandemic, the European Union launched this recovery and resilience facility. Huge amounts of EU funds was going back to the member states so they can sort of rebuild their industry after the pandemic. Now, after the war in Ukraine, EU has launched this Repower EU plan to sort of reduce our dependency and increase our resilience in the energy sector. And now they demand that all member states are revising their previous recovery and resilience plans to cope better with the Repower EU plan. And that means that member states can use the EU funds in their recovery and resilience plan to fund the clean tech industry projects of their choices. So they don't have to use state budget. As I said, now it's up to the member states to take this opportunity, but we hope and believe that some will do and see this as an opportunity to create a domestic industry in the forefront in the clean tech sector, and hopefully also for PV manufacturing. In addition to that, EU has launched the European Solar PV Industry Alliance, which is a platform with the general objective to enable a development of the EU solar PV in this industrial ecosystem. And through this alliance, it has been endorsed that EU has a goal that by 2025 there will be projects a number of projects that in total would secure 30 gigawatts of PV manufacturing in Europe along the whole value chain. So not only modules, but also wafers, polysilicon, etc. It's an ambitious target. 2025 is just around the corner, but that is something that's been endorsed by the Commission. There's also the possibility for some regions to get funds for renewable projects through the Just Transition Funds. The Just Transition Funds is an EU program which is dedicated to transform the former coal and fossil regions in Europe to renewable energy hubs. So if you can prove that you have a project that will create green jobs in these areas, there's a possibility to get finance through that. And it has a total budget of 17.5 billion euros. So that's another opportunity for investments. We also have the Innovation Fund, which is a funding program to demonstrate innovative low-carbon technologies. Enel's Threesun factory in Catania received funding from this one, and it's in the last large-scale call, there was a dedicated window for innovative clean tech manufacturing, which includes PV manufacturing. Upcoming, from an EU perspective, is the eco-design regulatory framework. So this is a broad EU regulatory framework that sort of sets the standards of all consumer electronics. And now the legislative text to include PV systems and PV modules for the private residential sector are being drafted. And we foresee that in 1 or 2 years to be implemented. And in addition, just 2 things that we from the European Solar Manufacturing Council currently are advocating is to have an important project common European interest. And this is a general framework that has existed for a time now, which makes it possible for EU member states to support innovative domestic industry projects without violating the state aid guidelines. And as I said, the state aid guidelines has been lifted, but that's until the end of 2025. This is a more long-term project that we would like to have in place so that innovative industrial projects could be supported also after 2025. We have official support by a number of member state countries, and some others we are expecting to get in the near future. And in the long run, we would also like to see PV modules being included in the carbon border adjustment mechanism. So basically, as is today, if you manufacture in Europe, you pay for your CO2 emissions through the ETS systems, which a Chinese or another domestic manufacturer doesn't. So it's actually a disadvantage that you pay for your CO2 emissions in Europe, while importing modules from other parts are not paying for their CO2 footprint, and that's what we would like to see be included in the CBAM regulation in the future. So to finalize my talk, there are now, I would say for the first time, an open door to see a renaissance of the PV manufacturing industry in Europe. The stated rules has been lifted. Now it's how are the details and what member states will take this opportunity, I would say it's the 2 major questions. And some key criteria to have a successful enablement of the PV supply chain in the EU is to have large-scale expansions. We really need to have volumes to be able to cut the prices and come closer to what the production costs are in China and also in the future in the US. And I think it's also wise to look a little bit to have that in the right locations. So that we minimize transport costs, but also the most energy-intensive part of the value chain are located in regions with low electricity prices. Otherwise, it will be difficult to make it profitable. There's also an advantage for the EU to jump onto the latest module technologies. And according to McKinsey, which did the study, they think that the production cost gap is lower for Europe with the new technologies. So that's an opportunity that could be taken up by us. We need to have the regulatory support of the European Commission, but also the member states. And in addition to that, what we want to achieve, if there are if China is reacting and have reactive policy responses, it will make it, of course, more difficult. So that's something to have a look at. I think also it's necessary that we align the stakeholders, that there hopefully are a will within the European community to pay small premiums for EU-made products, to make sure that the modules are being produced according to the EU labor laws, the EU environmental regulations, etc. And lastly, we need to have a creation of a local solar ecosystem, filling the gaps of the value chain that we currently doesn't produce anything in, or that the bottlenecks in different parts. It can be equipment provider, for example. Something is being discussed is that we lack someone in Europe that produce pullers for ingots, for example. So if we can achieve all these 5, in addition to what just happened in the EU with the lifted state aid rules, I think there's a possibility that we could have a paradigm shift now and see a re-establishment of the PV industry in Europe. However, it's still a lot of much more work to do, but I think we need to try, because if we don't try, we give up, and this industry will end up in China, India, and US, and Europe will stay in a position where we need to have good relations for them to have our energy transition in control. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much.